Well, good morning, everyone. We're back here with Lecture 14 of Rosicrucian Wisdom by Rudolf Steiner. Let's just get right into it. Lecture 14, The Nature of Initiation. Today we shall speak about the principle of initiation, or esoteric training. We will speak of the two schooling methods which take into special consideration what has been explained here concerning human evolution, for we must be clear that in a certain way we find the truth by retracing our steps to earlier stages of humanity. We said that the inhabitants of old Atlantis could perceive wisdom in all that surrounded them. The further back we go into the far past, the more do we find states of consciousness through which human beings were able to perceive the creative powers that pervade the world, and the spiritual beings who surrounded us. All that surrounds us has arisen through these creative beings, and to see them is indeed the meaning of knowing. When humanity had developed to our present stage of consciousness, in parentheses, and this has only come about during our fifth post-Atlantean epoch, a longing was left in the soul to penetrate again into the spiritual realms. I have told you how in the ancient Indian people there lived from the beginning a deep longing to know the real spirit behind all that surrounds us in this world. We have seen how they had a feeling that all that surrounded them was like a dream, an illusion, how their only task was to evolve upwards to the ancient wisdom that had worked creatively in early times. The pupils of the ancient rishis strove to tread the path that led them through yoga to look up into the realms from which they had themselves come down. They strove to escape from Maya to these spiritual realms above, and Maya means illusion. That is one path which we can take, but the newest way of attaining wisdom is the Rosicrucian path. This path does not point us to the past, but to the future, to those conditions that we will still live through. I just want to interject real quick here and say this is why people like Steiner, Max Heindel said to Western people to not engage in yoga and the things of the East, because those practices were custom tailored for those people. They unfolded naturally for those people at those specific times within their own particular ethnic circle. And the Western mind, being as we are, different from the people in the East, when they created these things, the world was a lot different. There was a lot of different factors at play. So what worked for them may not be ideal for us. So that's why Steiner says, all that stuff's great and everything. It's good. It works for sure. It's more tailored toward Eastern people, though. That's who it was custom tailored for. The Western esoteric tradition has been custom tailored in a different way toward the Western mind. And it's not to say that you can't extract, good things out of these other practices. Surely you can, but they weren't custom tailored for us. There's a better way for us. That's what he's saying there. Anyway, we'll just start the paragraph over. That is one path which we can take. But the newest way of attaining wisdom is the Rosicrucian path. This path does not point us to the past, but to the future, to those conditions that we still live through, that we will still live through. Through precise methods, the pupil is taught to develop in himself the wisdom that exists as a seed in every human being. This is the way that was given through the founder of the Rosicrucian esoteric stream, known to the outer world as Christian Rosenkreuz. It is not an unchristian way, but rather a Christian path adapted to modern conditions, and it lies between the actual Christian path and the yoga path. This path had been partially prepared long before the time of Christianity. It took on a special form through the great initiate Dionysius the Areopagite, who in the esoteric school of Paul at Athens inaugurated the training from which all later esoteric wisdom and training have been derived. These are the two paths of esoteric training particularly fitted for the West. All that is connected with our culture and the life we lead and must lead is lifted up, raised into the principle of initiation through the Christian and through the Rosicrucian training. The purely Christian way is somewhat difficult for modern human beings, hence the Rosicrucian path has been introduced for those who have to live in the present age. If someone wants to take the old, purely Christian path in the midst of modern life, he must be able to cut himself off for a time from the outside world, in order to enter it again later, all the more intensely. On the other hand, the Rosicrucian path can be followed by all, no matter in what occupation or sphere of life they may be placed. Let us describe the purely Christian way. This method is prescribed in the most profound Christian book, least understood by the representatives of Christian theology, the Gospel of John. Its content is also to be found in the Apocalypse or Secret Revelation. The Gospel of John is a miraculous book. One must live it, not merely read it. One can live it if one understands that its utterances are precepts for the inner life, and that one must observe them in the right way. The Christian path demands of its disciple that he consider the Gospel of John a book of meditation. A fundamental assumption, which is more or less absent in Rosicrucian teaching, is that one possesses the most steadfast belief in the personality of Christ Jesus. The pupil must at least believe in the possibility that the most lofty being, the leader of the fire spirits of sun evolution, was physically incarnated as Jesus of Nazareth, that Christ Jesus was not merely the ordinary man of Nazareth, not an individual like Socrates, Plato, or Pythagoras. One must see his fundamental difference from all others. If one wants to undergo a purely Christian training, one must be sure that in him lived a God-man of unique stature. Otherwise, one has not the right basic feeling that enters the soul and awakens it. Therefore, one must have a genuine belief in the first words of the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and God was the Logos. And on to the words, and the Logos became flesh and dwelt among us. Thus the same Spirit who was the ruler of the fire spirits, who was linked with the transforming of earth, whom we also call the Spirit of the earth, has actually dwelt among us in a garment of flesh. He was actually in a physical body. That must be recognized. If one cannot do this, then it is better to undertake another method of schooling. Someone, however, who has accepted this basic condition and every morning, through weeks and months, calls before his soul in meditation the gospel words down to the passage, full of grace and truth, and moreover in such a way that he not only understands them, but lives within them, will experience them as an awakening force in his soul. For these are not ordinary words, but awakening forces, which will call forth other forces in the soul. The pupil must only have the patience to bring them before his soul continuously, every day, and they will become the forces that Christian schooling needs, aroused through the awakening of quite definite feelings. The Christian path is a more inward one, whereas in Rosicrucian training, experiences are kindled by the outer world. The Christian path is accomplished through an awakening of the feelings. There are 7 stages of feeling that must be aroused. In addition, there are other exercises that are only given personally to the pupil and suited to his or her special character. It is, however, indispensable to experience the 13th chapter of the Gospel of John in the manner I will now describe. The teacher says to the pupil, "You must develop certain specific feelings. Imagine the following. The plant grows from the soil, but it is of a higher order than the mineral soil from which it grows. Nevertheless, the plant needs it. The higher could not exist without the lower. And if the plant could think, it would have to say to the earth, 'It is true that I am higher than you, yet without you I cannot live.' I ought to bow down to the earth in gratitude. Likewise must the animal bear itself toward the plant, for it could not exist without plant life. And even so must the human being bear himself with regard to the animal. If a human being has ascended higher, he must say to himself, 'I could never stand where I do without the lower.' He must bow down in gratitude before it, for it has made it possible for him to exist. No creature in the world could exist without the lower, to which it must feel gratitude. Even Christ, the very highest, could not exist without the 12, and the feeling of his bowing before them in gratitude is powerfully portrayed in this 13th chapter. He, the highest of all, washes his disciples' feet." I'm going to just throw in a little comment here because this reminds me of, for those who are also Freemasons, this reminds me of, the kind of dichotomy between the Blue Lodge and then the appendant bodies, right? So the appendant bodies, especially, I can only speak to Scottish Rite because that's the only one I've gone through, but it's very philosophical, and you're going to dive into like a lot of the deeper meanings of Masonic symbolism there. But the point I'm trying to make here is that there's a kind of dichotomy between Blue Lodge and then these higher degrees, and I've even read some older Masonic books where there's quite the dissension there between the esoteric Mason and the people who know what Masonry exists for, and then those who just join, to network, to have the dinners, to, just join for fellowship or, whatever the case may be. And that's great and everything, but it's not actually why the order exists, but it's what some people join for. And in their joining for that, they go through all the rituals, they go through all the memorization, and even though they may not understand it in an esoteric way, they still have the zeal to remember it and to properly implement it. So in that sense, I mean, they are a foundation. Even the Mason who doesn't go and do the study, the deep esoteric study to understand, and only does the study to gain the knowledge of what to repeat, they're still kind of a necessary building block, right? They're a foundation. So I've changed my view on it over the years. I don't necessarily look at the Mason who joins and has no desire to seek the esoteric wisdom. I don't really look at that as a negative thing in the way that maybe I used to, because if their heart's in the right place and they're a good person and they just enjoy it the way they enjoy it, I guess, but they're still keeping the knowledge intact for the next generation, so they do play a role. So anyway, and that can actually be said, that could be said about any Orthodox religion too. It's like, yeah, these people go to church with a very primitive understanding of what Christianity is, but if it genuinely is a driving force in their life to make them a better person, then how can you knock that? Everybody's kind of on their own level, and eventually we'll all get there. So I think it's important to have patience with people, have tolerance. You got to meet them on their level. Well, let's continue. If you imagine the basic feeling awakening in the human soul, If the pupil lives for weeks and months in reflection and contemplation that deepen this fundamental feeling, the gratitude with which the higher should look down to the lower, to which it really owes its existence, then one awakens the first basic feeling. The pupil will have entered deeply enough into the experience when certain symptoms appear, an external symptom and an internal vision, and an inner vision. The external symptom is that one feels one's feet to be laved by water. In an inner vision, one sees oneself as the Christ washing the feet of the 12. This is the first stage, that of the washing of the feet. The event in the 13th chapter of the John Gospel is not only an historical event, it can be experienced by anyone. It is an external, symptomatic expression of the fact that the pupil has raised himself thus far in his life of feeling, nor does the sign fail to appear when he has progressed to this point in the enhancement of his feeling life. The second stage, the scourging, is passed through if one immerses oneself in the following. How would it fare with me if the sufferings and blows of life broke in on me from every side? I must stand upright. I must make myself strong to meet all the sorrows that life offers, and must bear them. This is the second fundamental feeling that must be experienced. The outer feeling of it is an irritation on the whole surface of the body, and a more inner expression is a vision in which one sees oneself scourged, at first in dream and then in vision. Then comes the third, which is the crowning with thorns. Here, week-long, month-long, one must live in the feeling. How would it fare with me if I must not only undergo the sorrows and sufferings of life, but even if the holiest, my spiritual being, should be subjected to scorn and derision? Again, there must be no lamenting. It must be clear to the pupil that he must stand upright in spite of everything. His inwardly developed strength must make him able to stand erect despite mockery and scorn. Whatever threatens to overthrow his soul, he must stand firm. Then, in an inner astral vision, he sees himself with the crown of thorns and is sensible of an external pain on the head. This is the sign that he has advanced far enough in his life of feeling to be able to have these experiences. The fourth is the crucifixion. Here the pupil must again develop a special feeling. Today, people identify their body with their ego. Someone who wants to go through Christian initiation must accustom himself to carry his body through the world as if it were a foreign object, a table, for example. His body must become foreign to him. He carries it in through the doorway and out again like something external to himself. We may call this taking up our cross. When a pupil has advanced far enough in this fundamental feeling, there is revealed to him what is called the ordeal of the blood. Certain reddenings of the skin appear on certain places in such a way that he can call forth the wounds of Christ on hands and feet and on the right side of the chest. When the pupil, by his warmth of feeling, is able to develop in himself the ordeal of the blood, the external symptoms, then, in his inner being, the astral, he sees himself crucified. The fifth is the mystic death. The pupil raises himself ever higher to the feeling, I belong to the whole world. I am as little an independent being as the finger on my hand. He feels himself embedded in the whole world, as if a part of it. Then he experiences the feeling that all around him grows dark, as if a black darkness were enveloping him, like a pall that becomes dense around him. During this time, the pupil of Christian initiation comes to know all the sorrow and all the pain, all the evil and wickedness that attaches itself to mortal creatures. That is the descent into hell. Each one must live through it. Then something comes to pass, as if the veil were torn asunder, and the pupil sees into the spiritual worlds. This is called the rending of the veil. The sixth is the burial and resurrection. When the pupil has advanced thus far, he must say, I have already accustomed myself to look on my body as something foreign, but now I see everything in the world as close to me as my own body, which indeed is only taken from these substances. Every flower, every stone, is as near to me as my body. Then the pupil is buried in the earthly planet. This stage is necessarily linked with a new life, and the feeling of being united with the deepest soul of the planet, the soul of the Christ, who says, Those who eat my bread tread me underfoot. Those who eat my bread tread me underfoot. And that is because, to just throw this in there, Steiner describes the earth as the body of Christ. Just the body of Christ. Where's the intellect? Right? Where's the intellect at? Where's the intellect and the generative force of form? And what's in between those two things? What is the middle path? See, we've got Lucifer on one side, Saturn or Ahriman on the other side, and in the middle, we've got the balance. When you look at the spectrum, you've got the red on the left, the blue or the violet on the right, and then the middle between those is green. And then the color green has a very specific meaning. It's the balance between the intellect and the bodily form, or the makers of form. Anyway, let's not get too off in the weeds on that, but I mean, that's why during the sacrament, during the eating of the bread and drinking of the wine, that's why Christ says, here is my body and my blood, because you're walking on the body of Christ. How does that form? Well, we know that matter is congealed electricity, or frozen electricity. So just ponder on that for a minute. These doors will open up in your mind. You just start pondering on the symbolism and the stories and what they mean. Man, it's just, you spend a lot of time in meditation, these things will just open themselves up to you. The seventh, the ascension, cannot be described. One must have a soul that is no longer dependent on thinking through the instrument of the brain. In order to be sensible of what the pupil undergoes in what is called the ascension, it is necessary to have a soul that can live through this feeling. This passing through states of humanity and deep devotion represents the nature of the Christian initiation, and someone who earnestly goes through it experiences his resurrection in the spiritual worlds. Today it is not possible for all to undertake this path, and so the existence of another method leading to higher worlds has become a necessity. That is the Rosicrucian method. Here again, I must refer to 7 stages that will give a picture of the content of this training. Much of it has already been described in the periodical Lucifer Gnosis. Much can only be given from teacher to pupil within the schooling process, and yet an idea must be formed of what the training provides. It has 7 stages, though not consecutive. It is a question of the pupil's own individuality. The teacher prescribes what seems to him adapted to his pupil, and much else forms a part that cannot be made public. The 7 stages are as follows: study, imaginative knowledge, inspired knowledge, or reading the esoteric script, preparing the Philosopher's Stone, correspondence between macrocosm and microcosm, living into the macrocosm, and 7, or the last one, is divine bliss. Study in the Rosicrucian sense is the ability to immerse oneself in the content of thought not taken from physical reality, but from higher worlds. This is called the life in pure thought. Modern philosophers, for the most part, deny this. They say that every kind of thinking must have some vestige remaining from sense perception. This, however, is not the case, for no one, for example, can see a true circle. A circle must be seen in the mind. On the blackboard, it is only a collection of tiny particles of chalk. One can only attain to a real circle if one leaves aside all examples, all actual things. Thus, thinking in mathematics is a supersensible activity, but one must also learn to think supersensibly in other fields. Initiates have always exercised this kind of thinking in regard to the human being. Rosicrucian wisdom is such a supersensible knowledge, and its study, with which we are now occupied, is the first stage of the Rosicrucian training itself. I am not describing Rosicrucian wisdom for any external reason, but because it is the first stage of Rosicrucian initiation. People often enough think it unnecessary to talk about the members of the human being, or the evolution of humanity, or the different planetary evolutions. They would prefer to acquire beautiful feelings rather than study seriously. Nevertheless, however many beautiful feelings one acquires in one's soul, it is impossible to rise into the spiritual worlds by that means alone. Rosicrucian wisdom does not try to arouse the feelings, but through the stupendous facts of the spiritual worlds to let the feelings themselves begin to resound. The Rosicrucian feels it a kind of impertinence to take people by storm with feelings. He leads them along the path of humanity's evolution in the belief that feelings will then arise of themselves. He calls up before them the planet journeying in universal space, knowing that when the soul experiences this fact, it will be powerfully gripped in feeling. It is only an empty phrase to say one should address oneself directly to the feelings. That is just indolence. Rosicrucian wisdom lets the facts speak, and if these thoughts flow into the feeling nature and overpower it, then that is the right way. Only what the human being feels of his own accord can fill him with bliss or blessedness. The Rosicrucian lets the facts in the cosmos speak, for that is the most impersonal kind of teaching. It is a matter of indifference who stands before you. You must not be affected by personality, but by what he tells you of the facts of world evolution. Thus, direct veneration of the teacher is eliminated in Rosicrucian training. The teacher neither claims it nor requires it. He wishes to speak to the pupil of what exists, quite apart from himself. Someone who wants to press forward into the higher worlds must accustom himself to the kind of thinking in which one thought proceeds from another. A thinking of this nature is developed in my books, The Philosophy of Spiritual Activity and Truth and Knowledge. These books are not written in a way that enables one to extract a thought and place it elsewhere. They are written as an organism arises, one thought grows out of another. These books have nothing at all to do with the person who wrote them. He gave himself up to what the thoughts themselves worked out in him, how they linked themselves to one another. Thus, for someone desiring to make a beginning, study means acquiring a degree of knowledge of the elementary facts of spiritual science itself, whereas for someone who wishes to go further, it means inner meditation in a thought structure, which lets one thought grow out of another, out of itself. The second stage is imaginative knowledge, the knowledge which unites with what is given to the pupil at the study stage. Study is the basis, which must be perfected through individual imaginative knowledge. If you think over various things I touched on in previous lectures, you will find traces of what were everyday occurrences on Saturn. It is possible to look on all that is around us as the physiognomy of an inner spiritual element. People walk about on the earth, and it is a conglomeration of rocks and stones to them, but they must learn to grasp that everything surrounding them is a true physical expression of the spirit of the earth. Just as the body is ensouled, so is the earth planet the external expression for an indwelling spirit. We just talked about that a little while ago. The earth is the body of the Spirit of Christ. Only when people view the earth as possessing a body and soul, as the human being does, do they have an idea of what Goethe meant when he said, "All things corruptible are but a semblance." When you see tears run down a human face, you do not apply the laws of physics to examine how quickly or slowly the tears roll down. They express the inner sadness of the soul, just as a smile is the expression of the soul's inner joy. The pupil must educate himself to see in every single flower in a meadow the outer expression of a living being, the expression of the spirit dwelling in the earth. Some flowers seem to be tears, others are joyful expressions of the earth's spirit. Every stone, every plant, every flower is for the pupil of Let me say that again. Every stone, every plant, every flower is for the pupil the outer expression of the indwelling earth spirit, its physiognomy that speaks to him. Everything corruptible or transitory becomes a semblance of something external, expressing itself through it. Feelings like these had to be attained by the disciple of the Grail and by the Rosicrucian. The teacher would say, "See the flower chalice which receives the ray of sunlight. The sun calls forth the pure productive forces that slumber in the plant, and hence the sun's ray was called the holy lance of love. Now, see the human being. He is more exalted than the plant. He has the same organs within him. But all that the plant harbors in itself, perfectly pure and chaste, is in him steeped in lust and impure desire. The future of human evolution consists in this. The human being will again be chaste and pure, and speak forth his likeness into the world through another organ, which will be the transformed organ of generation. The human generative organ will be chaste and pure without desire, without passion, and as the calyx of the blossom turns upward to the holy love lance, it will turn to the spiritual ray of wisdom, and fructified by this will bring forth its own image. This organ will be the larynx. The larynx, right in your throat there. If you go back and follow the esoteric lore, at the point in time when humanity was still contained both male and female essence within itself, which we still do, by the way, but just in a different form. But this is back when we reproduced from ourselves, right? This is when humanity was in a completely different form than what we view as humanity now. We were more like the plants back then. But at a point, we had to evolve. So the sexual functions split, and one portion went upward and created our brain, and the other portion went downward and created our generative organs. This is now to connect the larynx in the throat to the generative organs. I'll provide one proof, and this is not mine. This comes from the Rosicrucian teachings. But there's a reason why when a male goes through puberty, his voice changes. right? The voice and the creative function of the voice is directly related to and connected with the generative function of human generation, right? The sex organs. That's why a male's voice deepens during puberty, right? The sex organs are forming and evolving, right? And so is the larynx, the voice. They're directly connected. In the future humanity will create through spoken word alone. That is what the esoteric lore tells us. The Grail pupil was shown the plant at its lower stage has this pure chalice. The human being has lost it. He has degenerated to impure desires. Out of the spiritualized sun ray, he must let this chalice arise again. In chastity, he must develop that which forms the holy grail of the future. Thus, the pupil looks up to the great ideal. What comes to pass in the slow evolution of the whole human race is experienced and advanced by the initiate. He shows us humanity's evolution in pictures, and these pictures work quite differently from the abstract thoughts that have been produced by the modern materialistic age. If you imagine evolution in such lofty and powerful pictures as the Grail, then the effect is different from that of ordinary knowledge, which is unable to exercise any deep influence on your organism. Imaginative knowledge works down to the ether body, and thence onto the blood. And this is the medium which acts formatively on the organism. The human being will become increasingly more able to work on his organism through his ether body. All imaginative knowledge based on truth is at the same time healing and health-giving. It makes the blood healthy in its circulation. The best teacher is imaginative knowledge, if only the human being is strong and devoted enough for it to be able to work on him. The third stage is reading the esoteric script. That is, not only seeing isolated pictures, but letting the interrelationship of these pictures work upon one. This becomes what is called the esoteric script. One begins to coordinate the lines of force which stream creatively through the world, forming them into definite figures and color forms through imagination. One learns to discover an inner connection that is expressed in these figures, and this acts as a spiritual sound, as the harmony of the spheres, for the figures are founded on true cosmic proportions. Our writing is a last decadent relic of this old esoteric script and is modeled on it. Now, what he's speaking to there is that these Elohim that we call, which are just the forces of the one we call God, it's the manifesting forces of God, the Elohim, or the 7 rays of light of the spectrum, is what undergirds all of creation. So you take those principles, each one of those 7 rays stands for a particular principle which expresses itself in multiple forms. In one way, one of these rays, if we were to isolate one of the rays and just say, okay, we'll isolate this ray. This ray that I'm looking at is, say, the red ray, right? This red ray, the energy of that ray expresses itself in red. It also has a particular tone associated with it, and it also has a particular shape associated with it. And each one of these frequencies, which produces each individual ray, has its own form, its own color, its own frequency, and you can demonstrate this by cymatic experiments. Now I don't know off the top of my head, but if you know what frequency creates the color red, you can run that frequency through a plate with sand or salt on it, and it'll create the same exact physical pattern every single time. It also has a smell associated with it. It also has a sound, that frequency associated with it. So form is sound is color? That's what we got to wrap our heads around. There's only a certain amount of things which interact, which manifest through patterns. And when you can begin to unravel what those patterns are, you will have just a greater understanding of what's going on all around you. It's a completely new world when you begin to really manifest these ideas in your mind and begin to actually live life by them. That's the hard thing to do, because we're so ingrained in the way that we think now. We're so entrenched in these normal modes of operation, or what we've been told is normal. We've been drastically taken away from all this stuff. We're not operating normally right now. We're operating on an imbalance to the left, the curse of Cain, so said, where we've lost our imaginative section for a time, and it was necessary in order for us to gain the intellectual capacity, right? So when we combine these both, then we have what we call Christ. Anyway, getting off into the weeds again there. See where I was at here. Okay. We come to the fourth stage, preparing the Philosopher's Stone, through exercises of the breathing process. When we breathe in a natural way, we need the plant world for our breathing. If plants were not there, we could not live, for they give us oxygen and assimilate the carbon we breathe out. The plant builds up its own organism from this and gives back oxygen. Thus, oxygen is continually renewed for us by the plant world. Humanity could not exist by itself. Eliminate the plant world and humanity would die out in a short time. You see the cycle. You inhale oxygen, which the plant exhales. You exhale carbon, which the plant inhales, and from which it builds up its own bodily nature. Thus, the plant belongs to us. It is the instrument by which our life is sustained. You may see in coal how the plant builds its body, from carbon. For coal is nothing other than the dead remains of plants. Rosicrucian training guides the pupil through a specifically regulated breathing process to form the organ that can affect the transformation of carbon into oxygen within him. What is today done by the plant externally will later on, through a future organ which the pupil is already developing by means of his training, be affected in the human being himself. This is slowly being prepared. Through the regulated breathing process, the human being will bear in himself the instrument for preparing oxygen. He will have become akin to the plant, whereas now he is of a mineral nature. He will retain the carbon in himself and build his body from it, and hence his body will later on be more plant-like. Then he can turn to meet the holy lance of love. The whole of humanity will then possess a consciousness like that gained by the initiate today, when he raises himself into the higher worlds. This is called the transmutation of human substance into that substance of which carbon itself is the basis. This is the alchemy that leads the human being to build up his own body, as does the plant today. One calls this the preparation of the Philosopher's Stone, and carbon is the outer symbol. But it is not the Philosopher's Stone until the pupil can create it himself through his regulated breathing process. The teaching can only be given from teacher to pupil. It is wrapped in deep secrecy, and only after he is completely purified and made ready can the pupil receive this mystery. If it were to be made public today, then human beings in their egoism would gratify their lowest needs through the misuse of this highest mystery. And that is why the mystery schools kept their secrecy from the beginning times. When they were pure, it wasn't a secrecy to manipulate and create a power differential. It was much in like the way that a parent raises their child, right? You can't tell your children everything. They wouldn't understand it. So you have to explain things to them in fables and fairy tales and relate things to them in a way that they can understand it. If you just bust out some, quantum physics for a little kid, they're just not going to know what the hell you're talking about. Well, it's no different for why the mystery schools existed. The mystery schools existed because there were very enlightened beings who were pure of heart, who had a knowledge that they wanted to disseminate, but humanity was not ready to receive it. So they had to disseminate it in ways that humanity could experience it and could understand it at the level they were at. What happened, and this was the big fear of the mystery schools, was that if these teachings ever did get into the hands of the savages, the people who would misuse it, we're not talking about like Native Americans or anything, just get all that out of your head. We're just talking about humanity, right? And humanity in its primitive form is savage, right? we didn't have the faculties yet to properly understand. So the big fear that the esoteric schools had came true. It came true. It came to manifest. At a point in time, the mysteries were usurped by people who would then use that knowledge as a power differential over humanity. But here's the kicker. The esoteric schools planned for this in advance. So there's a built-in sort of dead man switch in the esoteric material itself that as the harder you try to destroy it, it has a built-in mechanism that will save it from destruction. I'm not going to go through the details of that right now, but it's true. And you're going to see it. Maybe in your lifetime you'll see the ancient wisdom massively have a huge revival. But anyway, it's another story for another day. This is what is called the transmutation of human substance into that substance of which carbon itself is the basis. I think I already read that part. I'll read it again. This is the alchemy that leads the human being to build up his own body, as does the plant today. One calls this the preparation of the philosopher's stone, and carbon is the outer symbol. But it is not the philosopher's stone until the pupil can create it himself through his regulated breathing process. The teaching can only be given from teacher to pupil. It is wrapped in deep secrecy, and only after he is completely purified and made ready can the pupil receive this mystery. If it were made public today, then human beings in their egoism would gratify their lowest needs through the misuse of this highest mystery. And what did Steiner say it's made of? Well, we're made of carbon, right? What did he say the philosopher's stone's made of? Carbon, right? What are these global elites trying to eliminate right now on Earth? Carbon, right? Right? They want a silicon-based life form, right? Very evil people at work in this world. There is a spiritual battle going on right now. The fifth stage is the correspondence of macrocosm and microcosm. When we survey the path of human evolution, we see that what lies within the human being today has gradually entered from without. For instance, the glands were an external growth on sun, like our modern fungi. All that today lies within the human skin was once outside. The human body is, in a way, pieced together from what was spread outside it. Each separate member of your physical body, ether body and astral body, was somewhere outside in the universe. This is the macrocosm in the microcosm. Your very soul was outside in the Godhead. Whatever is within us corresponds to something that is outside, and we must learn to know these true correspondences in ourselves. You are familiar with the spot on the brow just above the root of the nose. It expresses the fact that a certain something which was formerly outside has withdrawn inside. If you penetrate this organ in meditation, sink yourself into it. This denotes more than a mere brooding in this point. You learn to know the part of the outer world that corresponds to it. The larynx too, you get to know, and the forces that build it. Thus, you learn about the macrocosm through immersing yourself in your own body. Man, know thyself was the maxim, right? This is no mere brooding within yourself. You should not say, God is within and I will see him. You would only find the puny human being whom you yourself magnify into God. Someone who only speaks of his inward brooding never comes to real knowledge. To reach this by the path of Rosicrucian wisdom is less comfortable and demands real work. The universe is full of beautiful and marvelous things. One must be absorbed in these. One must seek God in his individual expressions. Then one can find him in oneself, and only then does one learn to know God as one. The world is like a great book. And just interject and say, yes, the world, the creation, was the first Bible. When you're reading the writings down of these biblical and scriptural writings, you are reading the book of nature. You're reading all the functions of the creation in stories, which anthropomorphize human beings, but it also lives within human beings as well. So these stories are true on so many levels and resonate on so many levels. Once you understand the multiple strata of these stories, it's really amazing. The world is like a great book. We find its letters in created things. We must read these from beginning to end, and then we learn to read the book microcosm and the book macrocosm from beginning to end. There is no longer mere understanding. It lives in feelings. It fuses the human being with the whole universe, and he feels all things to be the expression of the divine spirit of the earth. If someone has reached this point, he voluntarily performs all his deeds in accordance with the will of the whole cosmos, and this is what is known as divine bliss. When we are able to think in this way, we are treading the Rosicrucian path. Christian schooling is based more on the development of inner feelings. In Rosicrucian schooling, all that is spread out in physical reality as the divine nature of the earth is allowed to work upon us and reverberate in us as feeling. These are two paths that are open to all. If you think in the manner of modern thought, then you can take the Rosicrucian path, no matter how scientific you may be. Modern science is an assistance if you do not merely study cosmic evolution by reading the letters, as it were, but carry your research into what is concealed behind them. Just as in a book, one does not consider the separate letters, but reads the meaning by their aid. You must seek the spirit behind the science. Then science becomes for you simply the letters which convey the spirit. And that's what science was actually, to just throw this in there, that's what science originally was intended for. There was no difference between religion and science at the beginning. The idea that there was something greater than us was just kind of inherent, and science was then practiced as a way to reveal. They call it the divine autopsy for a reason, because you're literally performing an autopsy on God's creation to then reveal the various secrets and the various understandings, the various correlations between macrocosm and microcosm. It really, when you do that, and you find these underlying patterns, these underlying energies, which are responsible for creating everything, then you do realize your oneness with all that exists. You can experience it for yourself. If someone has reached this point, he voluntarily performs all his deeds in accordance with the will of the whole cosmos, and this is what is known as divine bliss. When we are able to think in this way, we are treading the Rosicrucian path. Christian schooling is based more on the development of inner feelings. In Rosicrucian schooling, all that is spread out in physical reality as the divine nature of the earth is allowed to work upon us and reverberate in us as feeling. These are two paths that are open to all. If you think in the manner of modern thought, then you can take the Rosicrucian path, no matter how scientific you may be. Modern science is an assistance if you do not merely study cosmic evolution by reading the letters, as it were, but carry yourself into what is concealed behind them. That is the key point. Everything physical is an effect of an invisible cause. Just as in a book, one does not consider the separate letters, but reads the meaning by their aid. You must seek the spirit behind science. Then science becomes for you simply the letters which convey the spirit. That's what it was always intended to do. What has been said is not meant to be a comprehensive account of Rosicrucian training. It is only meant to serve as an indication of what can be found in it. It is a path for the present-day human being. It makes him capable of working into the future. These are only the elementary stages to give some idea of the path. We can thus realize how the Rosicrucian method enables us to penetrate into the higher mysteries. Spiritual science is necessary to humanity for its further progress. What is to take place for the transformation of humanity must be brought about through human beings themselves. Someone who accepts the truth in his present incarnation will mold for himself in later incarnations the outer form for the deeper truths. Thus, what we have discussed in these lectures is an interrelated whole. It is the instrument which is to work creatively for future civilization. It is taught today because the human being of the future needs these teachings, because they must be introduced into the evolutionary path of humanity. Everyone who will not accept this truth of the future lives at the cost of others, but those who accept it live for others, even if at first they are impelled by an egoistic longing for the higher worlds. If the path is the right one, then it is of itself the destroyer of self-seeking and the best teacher of selflessness, rather. The best teacher of selflessness. Spiritual development is now needed by humanity and must be implanted into it. An earnest, true endeavor for truth, step by step. This alone leads to genuine brotherliness. This is the magician who can best bring about the uniting of humanity. This will serve as the means to bring about humanity's great goal, unity. We shall reach this goal if we develop the means to it in ourselves, if we seek to acquire these means in the noblest, purest way, for it is a matter of hallowing humanity through these means. Thus, spiritual science appears to us not only as a great ideal, but as a force with which we permeate ourselves and out of which knowledge wells up for us. Spiritual science will become increasingly more widespread. It will penetrate more and more all the religious and practical aspects of life, just as the great law of existence penetrates all beings. It is a factor in humanity's evolution. This is the sense in which these letters on Rosicrucian wisdom have been given. If this has been understood, not only abstractly, but so that feelings have been evoked through knowledge of facts, then it can work directly into life. When this knowledge involves us fully, flows from the head to heart and thence to hands, into all that we do and create, then we have grasped the foundation of spiritual science. Then we have grasped the great task of civilization that is placed in our hands, and then, from this knowledge, feelings, too, are developed, feelings that those who like to take things easily would prefer to develop direct. Rosicrucian Wisdom does not wish to revel in feelings. It wishes to present you with the facts of the Spirit. The pupil must take part, must let himself be stimulated by the facts which have been described. Feelings and sensations must be aroused in him through facts. In this sense, spiritual science should become a powerful impulse for the sphere of feeling, but at the same time be something that leads us directly into the facts of supersensible perceptions, which lets them first arise as thoughts and then leads the seeker upward into the higher world. This was the intended purpose of these lectures. So a balancing of intellect and feeling is truly what the Christ represents, that balance between pure intellect and pure emotion, pure intellect, pure feeling. It's a balancing between the two to round both of them out. Both intellect and emotion have their positive and negative attributes, but when you balance them both with their positive attributes, then you've got a good, well-rounded use of them, and that is what is depicted as the Christ balance between those two streams of evolutionary currents, one of which is involution, the other evolution. So that's going to do it for chapter 14 there. Let's see what we got next. Now it's just endnotes. So that's it, guys. That's the end of that book by Steiner called Rosicrucian Wisdom. We just wrapped it up. Thanks again for listening. We'll be doing more as time permits. Go ahead and like, subscribe, share with people who you think are ready for this. You know, don't cast pearls before swine, but if you know someone who is ready, then introduce it to them. But don't push it on them. Okay? You can't force this stuff. Well, all right. Again, I do thank you. We're going to cut it off right now. Everybody have a blessed day. Take care, and we will be back soon to do some more readings.